Some of you have been repeating an outdated lie, and it's time to stop. Welcome to the Rob Lett Show. I'm your host, Rob Lett. There was no party switch. That's the focus of today's podcast. Well, today I'm broadcasting from Maryland. You probably noticed that the background is very different, but it doesn't change the fact that we've got a lot to unpack here today, because this is a lie that's been going around for a long time, and it's time we finally put an end to all this nonsense. Today we're going to talk about why 2016 changed everything. We're also going to talk about what one of my favorite TV shows has to do with today's topic. We're going to handle this like a police investigation. We're going to talk about the crime. We're going to talk about the suspects. We're going to talk about the description and also the motive. If it is a lie, which is what I say it is, then what's the motive behind it? Why lie? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the clues that are left behind so that you know it's a lie. We're also going to talk about whether or not the Democrat Party is guilty of anything. And then we're going to summarize it all by talking about why nobody believes in the party switch anymore. But before we get started, I'd like you to go ahead and do a few things. First of all, like this video, subscribe to it. If you're on YouTube, to the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see a bell. That's a notifications bell. Click it and it'll notify you the next time we release a new show. If you're on Rumble though, to the upper right hand corner, you'll see a share button. Click it and it'll share this video with a friend of yours who should have been here with us today. Go ahead and do all of those things that apply right now. Before we dismantle a lie, we have to first explain the lie that's being told. Here's what the party switch theory says. The Democrat Party may have been the party of racism a long time ago, but today they have undergone a switch, and today they are the champions of civil rights. Their assertion is in the 1960s, the two parties switched sides, brought about by Richard Nixon's so-called Southern strategy that converted these racist Democrats into Republicans. So today, supposedly, Democrats are the good guys and Republicans are the bad guys. I tell you this not only so you know what the so-called party switch is, but also for you to know that I'm familiar with all of the ridiculous assertions that have been said about Richard Nixon and Kevin Phillips and the so-called Southern strategy. So please don't leave comments for me telling me I don't know about this or that. I've heard all that garbage. I won't be addressing any of that today because complexity is what the Democrat Party have relied on to keep people ignorant. I'm going to make it very easy for you to see by taking a simple common sense approach. Before I dive into this, here's something that should be common sense, but nobody ever says. There's a difference between a party and its supporter. For instance, if you watch my show, you know that I'm a conservative and I vote Republican. But would you go so far as to say that I am the Republican Party? I hope you wouldn't, because that's silly. I am not the party. I'm just a supporter. Back when Bill Clinton was president, I was still young and I knew nothing about politics. I voted for Bill Clinton back then. Well, if I had once voted Democrat, but now I only vote Republican, would you say that the party switched again in the 90s? Also, no. That's ridiculous. As a supporter, I switched who I lent my support to, but understand that both the Republican and the Democrat Party remained intact with their fundamental principles regardless of what I did. So voters switch all the time. Organizations, parties rarely switch this drastically, let alone two organizations at the same time, which is what would have had to happen in order for there to be a party switch. So even before I get started, right there is a chink in their story. But I'll give you my biggest reason for not going the traditional route of explaining this fallacy. It's because I don't have to anymore. See, the Democrat Party has had a deep, dark secret for a long time. If you didn't know their secret, you might just swallow their lie about the party switch. But once their secret came out, it was very difficult to keep up the lie. The lie is that the Democrat Party has tried to hide the fact that they're socialists. You're watching this now and you're probably saying, oh, I know that. Sure, you may know it now, but for a long time, the Democrat Party tried to keep it a secret. Maxine Waters let the S word slip once and you think she was going to have a seizure because of it.
Guarantee to the American people, because of the inaction of the United States Congress, ever increasing prices unless the demand comes down, and the $5 will look like a very low price in the years to come if we are prohibited from finding new reserves, new opportunities to increase supplies.
And guess what this liberal would be all about? This liberal will be all about socializing, would be about basically taking over and the government running all of your companies.
Why would a professional politician lose their composure over a simple word? What's wrong with saying the word socialize? Even the expressions on her colleagues' faces let you know she screwed up. Then there was the time Jim Carrey was on the Bill Maher show when he said this.
We have to say yes to socialism, to the word and everything.
Isn't that a peculiar phrasing? To the word and everything? He's suggesting that at some point in the Democrat Party's history, there was something wrong with even saying the word. What could have happened in their past that had them so shaken they can barely speak? I'll come back to this later. What I want to address now is why I no longer have to play those silly games that everyone else had to play when refuting the so-called party switch. We no longer have to play those games because 2016 changed everything. A candidate named Bernie Sanders opened the floodgates when he admitted he was a socialist. Notice there are only two parties. Bernie had to pick the party that best aligned with his views as a socialist. He didn't join the Republican ticket. He joined the Democrats. If you want to know more about how the Democrat Party sabotaged Bernie Sanders, find my show called The Truth about our last two elections. But the main thing you should pay attention to is, once Bernie Sanders admitted he was a socialist, it was like going to a confessional. Democrats all over the place started admitting they were socialists too. Bernie Sanders, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Andrew Gillum, Beto O'Rourke, every time you looked up, somebody in the Democrat Party was claiming socialism. And that was the nail in the coffin for their lie about the party switch, because the lie they had hid for so long had finally come to light. One of my favorite shows when I was a kid was a show called Columbo. I used to think that I had a thing for murder mysteries, but it wasn't until I got older that I realized Columbo really wasn't a murder mystery. What made Columbo different is we all knew who the criminal was right from the start. The cliffhanger was figuring out how Columbo was going to prove they did it. I'm not going to handle this like you've seen every other person tackle this subject. I'm going to handle this like a police investigation. You may say, police investigation, what's the crime? The crime is racism. That's what Democrats are trying to charge Republicans with. They're trying to charge Republicans with being the party that Democrats were. The founders of the KKK, creators of Jim Crow, discrimination. So that's the charge Democrats are trying to avoid, the charge of racism. Every investigation has to have some suspects, and in this case, there are only two suspects, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, and the Democrats say they're not guilty. My goal today as an investigator is to prove they are guilty. My theory is the Democrat Party today is the exact same party they were in the past. They've just learned to tone the racism down in order to stay in power. But I can't just make unfounded accusations like that. Remember, this is an investigation, and there are two suspects. When the police have multiple suspects for a crime, they usually ask for a description so they can narrow down who the culprit might be. Remember, we agreed earlier, we're not talking about the beliefs and behaviors of voters. We're talking about the beliefs and behaviors of organizations, parties. Let's describe the Republican Party first to see if this could be our guy. They believe in the free market, allowing people to be free to make their own choices. Republicans believe in a Second Amendment, the right for every American to own a firearm for their own self-defense. We're pro-life, meaning the lives of our children are sacred. We believe taxes should be minimal. You should be able to keep most of your earnings for yourself and your family. Does any of this description sound like a slave owner? Do any of these characteristics match the Jim Crow era? I don't see a fit. And I'm really trying to think. Let's describe the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party believes in the expansion of government in almost everything. They believe in gun control unless it's for government. The government can have as many guns as they want. Democrats are not really fans of free speech. Even today, it's most likely a Democrat who's trying to get you fired for something you said online. Ask Dave Chappelle. They are not pro-life. They believe that there are instances when someone else's life and death can be up to you. They believe the rights of a community outweigh those of an individual, and they despise capitalism. They once proposed a tax rate as high as 90%. Does any of this description sound like a slave owner? Do any of these characteristics match the Jim Crow era? The answer is absolutely. What most people don't realize is black and white water fountains can only be enforced when the government legalizes it. Arresting someone for sitting at the front of a bus, at the front of a restaurant, or for reading a book are all examples of government expansion, which Republicans are against. Eugenics, the elimination of less desirables, was routinely taught and practiced by a woman named Margaret Sanger. She's the founder of Planned Parenthood, who Democrats fight tooth and nail to keep open today, while Republicans fight to defund it. I could go on, but based on our description, it sounds like we may have our culprit. But why? Every crime needs a motive. Why would Democrats be racist and then lie about it? At the end of the day, whether it's an organization or a person, we do things because it's part of our beliefs. We already gave a description of the suspect. Perhaps it's time to delve deeper into where the principles of the party came from and whether the suspect has any known associates that can help us out. George Fitzhugh is a name that you might not recognize. He was an American social theorist who published a number of pro-slavery social theories in the 1800s. He wrote a book called Sociology for the South. His book is actually the first book in the English language to contain the word sociology in the title. In his book, he wrote, "Slavery," he wrote, "is a form and the very best form of socialism. Socialism," he continued, "proposes to do away with free competition, to avoid protection and support at all times to the laboring class." Keep in mind who Fitzhugh's audience is. His audience are Democrats. This is the 1800s. Keep in mind, even Democrats don't deny that they were once the party of racism. But we already knew that Democrats had a history of slavery. That's not what we're looking for right now. Right now, we're still trying to discover their motive. Why? Why would Democrats engage in such a thing? According to expert George Fitzhugh, it's because slavery aligns with the fundamental belief of Democrats. They believe in something called socialism, which they've been reading about from European socialists. The founder of European socialism was a man by the name of Karl Marx. He was a philosopher and a sociologist, just like George Fitzhugh, only in Germany and more widely known, also from the 1800s. Without going too deep down the rabbit hole here, socialism summarized is a philosophy that is heavily based on class distinctions between people. In that same vein, it's also a philosophy about oppression and revolution. So American Democrats, being fascinated with this new theory of socialism in Europe, they adopted this philosophy of class distinctions and oppression in order to reduce blacks to a lower class status back in the United States. Now, there was a lot that happened in relation to the invention of the cotton gin that put blacks in the crosshairs of this political philosophy. But to keep things at a high level, the end result was blacks were enslaved and socialism was the justification for doing so. So we finally have their motive for enslaving people. There was a hot new political theory being tossed around in Germany that American Democrats were intrigued with. Add the explosion of the cotton industry in the agricultural South and the desire to want to implement these philosophies here at home, and you have a mess on your hands. This only answers one of our questions, however. We know where the desire came from, but why cover it up now? Why claim that you were once the purveyors of racism and then Republicans took your place if it were not true? The answer lies in Germany. As you might imagine, if Americans are fascinated with German philosophy, surely there are Germans who are fascinated with it as well. Adolf Hitler was that German. If you've been paying attention, Adolf Hitler and American Democrats now have something in common. This new philosophy called socialism. What many people still don't know is American Democrats and Adolf Hitler had a lot of admiration going back and forth between them back then. As a matter of fact, Hitler used the Jim Crow laws created by Democrats to discriminate against blacks in the United States as a template to discriminate against Jews in Germany. And long before Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger was a specialist in exterminating human weeds. Hitler admired her work in eugenics and how to exterminate the undesirables of society. I'm amazed at how many people either still don't know or don't care to know Margaret Sanger's past till this day. Here, author John Connolly writes he was astonished to learn about Margaret Sanger's past. Connolly writes, "It was with some astonishment that I learned several days ago that Planned Parenthood of Manhattan had decided to remove the name Margaret Sanger from its headquarters and had encouraged other Planned Parenthood affiliates to do the same.
The authorities cited Sanger's eugenicism and racism as the motives for this dethronement of the iconic founder of the Birth Control League and its successor, Planned Parenthood. Until recently, anyone who cited Sanger in print would be swiftly rebutted by Planned Parenthood apologists who insisted that the charges of eugenicism and racism were false. But stubborn facts and our nation's new scrutiny of our racial history have eroded the mythology of Sanger and laid bare her eugenics project in its racist, coercive details. So we finally nailed down our suspect's motive. Not only their motive for racism, but their motive for this entire party switch lie. Understand, especially after having lost the Civil War to Republicans, the Democrats were the embarrassment of the nation. The Democrats felt they had to rebrand themselves. How do you recover from being associated with Hitler, Margaret Sanger, and Mussolini? How do you survive as a party after a bombshell like that? The answer is you rebrand yourself and you lie.
So that was the motive.
This isn't new, by the way. Criminals since the beginning of time have had the unique ability to be caught dead to rights. You can have the video and the photo of them actually doing the crime that you're accusing them of, and they'll still look you straight in the eye and say,
I didn't do this stuff.
Even Conley admitted in this article that he was shocked about Margaret Sanger's past. Why? Because Planned Parenthood had denied it so vehemently. But facts are stubborn things. So how's our investigation going? It's going well, I'd say. We've narrowed down our suspects from 2 to just 1, and we've established a motive to disassociate themselves from arguably the most evil man on the planet. But just when you think we're done with our investigation, we're not.
One thing I almost forgot.
The police don't come get you with just a couple of clues. They gather as many clues as they can before they arrest you.
I'll tell you, in most cases, you don't have any clues. In this case, I got so many clues, they don't know where to start.
And the reason I know most Democrat supporters are in denial is because the Democrat Party have left so many clues that they've never switched who they were. It's impossible not to notice unless you're just purposely looking away. For instance, Hitler despised capitalism and the wealthy. It was his disdain for capitalism that ultimately led him to targeting Jews. Is there a party that despises capitalism today? Is there a party that targets the wealthy class of people every election cycle?
Millionaires and billionaires.
What would define your campaign?
Standing up to the billionaire class.
Millionaires.
Millionaires and billionaires at the same time.
Millionaires and billionaires.
Millionaires and billionaires.
Millionaires and billionaires.
Millionaires and billionaires.
Millionaire and billionaire.
Millionaires and billionaires.
Billionaires and millionaires.
Billionaires.
Just pay your fair share.
It's easy to look at AOC's dress and see the elegance of the gala and wonder, Rob, are you sure this is the same party of slavery, death, and misery today? The answer is absolutely. If you saw my show Rise of the Black Conservative, you know I revealed something that very few people know. Americans talk about Hitler and dictatorships as though it were something foreign to us, as though it were something that occurred over there. But in that show, I made it very clear that the Holocaust may have happened over there, but there were people with similar beliefs right here.
My name's Marshall Curry, and I am the director of A Night at the Garden, a short documentary that's been nominated for an Academy Award. The film is about a rally that took place in New York in Madison Square Garden in 1939 when 20,000 Americans gathered for a Nazi rally. The whole film is made of archival footage. There's no voiceover, there are no interviews. It sort of parachutes the viewer into this rally and without explanation. And when you first arrive, you see people protesting outside, maybe not so sure what's going on. The marquee outside describes it as a pro-America rally, and then we go inside, you see people marching in with American flags, and there's a huge 30-foot portrait of George Washington. But then you start to look a little closer and you realize that there's swastikas on either side of him, and that the people are holding flags that have swastikas, and they start to do the Nazi salute. And you discover that this rally is sort of using the icons of American patriotism to sell anti-Semitism and hate. You know that if there's a rally where 20,000 people show up, that there are many, many thousands of people beyond that who didn't come out that night but share the philosophy. And I think America in the 1930s, anti-Semitism, discrimination against Jews and other minority groups was not the mainstream philosophy, not the majority of Americans' philosophy, but it was a legitimate philosophy.
All of this happened obviously on U.S. soil and during FDR's administration, who was a huge fan of Benito Mussolini. And the director of this film said it best: when you have 20,000 people who show up to a rally, that should let you know there are many, many more who believe the exact same way they do. They just couldn't attend. This was the environment during the FDR administration. I mentioned also that I found it odd that Democrats tried so hard to label Trump a dictator when they know full well there's only one president who served more than 2 terms, and that was FDR. In fact, the only thing that kept FDR from continuing to serve is the fact that he died in office. In 2020, Joe Biden visited Georgia. He made 2 stops. One was to Atlanta, the other to a place called Warm Springs, Georgia. Why Warm Springs, Georgia? Because that's where FDR went when he was sick. This little visit was Biden's way of nodding to the socialists that he was one of them. Joe Biden is honoring the man who was a dictator. He's honoring the man who admired Mussolini. But most importantly, you should recognize this is a Democrat honoring this man today. Here's an interesting clip from Dinesh D'Souza's movie, Death of a Nation.
Check out the official Nazi platform. State-controlled healthcare, profit sharing for workers and large corporations, moneylenders and profiteers punished by death, state control of education, state control of media and the press, state control of banks and industries, seizure of land without compensation, state control of religious expression. This reads like something jointly written by Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Read the Nazi platform at the Democratic National Convention, and most likely it would provoke thunderous applause.
In Nazi Germany, Hitler used a terrorist group called the Brown Shirts in order to enforce compliance. Mussolini used the Black Shirts. The Democrats in the old days used to use the KKK. Which party has a uniform terrorist group today? Again, the Democrats. Don't let the signs fool you. So-called Antifa does not show up to fight white supremacy. They show up to start fights when conservative speakers appear on college campuses. They burned and destroyed property when Trump won the election. Similar to the KKK of old, they defend the interests of the Democrat Party today. Have you ever seen a show when the police suspect someone of a crime, but they want to set a trap just to be sure they've got their man? That's kind of what happened recently. My wife and I went to Stone Mountain, Georgia, and we purposely filmed the mountain as it is today, with all of the Confederate leaders on it. I told my wife I'm recording it now because now that the secret is out, Democrats will want to erase some of these monuments because they're evidence that they committed a crime. And sure enough, years later,
near the White House overnight, a tense standoff with police as protesters tried to tear down a statue of former President Andrew Jackson.
It's a racist Confederate statue. Okay, it should be knocked down and put in a museum.
All across the country, statues and monuments being toppled, all under the guise of fighting racism, of course. But it's funny how these statues and monuments being toppled are actually monuments of Democrats. So while some saw these protests as Democrats fighting white supremacy, I saw it as a criminal returning to the scene of the crime to remove their fingerprints for future generations. Look, I could do this all day, but it's unnecessary because the case is pretty damning. The Democrats' entire position is that they're not the same party today Oh, really? Keeping socialism a secret within your party? They've been doing that today. Having a bunch of socialists within your party? They're doing that today. A uniformed terrorist group? They're doing that today. Election rigging? They're doing that today. Despising capitalism and the wealthy? They do that today. They still believe in a centralized government today. They're still followers of Margaret Sanger today. Followers of Karl Marx today. Fans of FDR today. Still opponents of free speech today. Discrimination against black people and poor people through their policies today. And I don't even have enough time to touch on the undercover sting that Project Veritas did on the Bernie Sanders campaign today, or the Democrat politician who ran for office with a guillotine as their logo today.
You left enough clues to sink a ship.
If Colombo were investigating the Democrat Party for a crime, I'd say it's about time he makes an arrest. Don't you think?
Officer, with this, I think I got a conviction, don't you?
You gotta admit I had you going for a while now, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
The funny thing is, we still have Democrat supporters running around still trying to spread that old, outdated lie, even though nobody believes it. Look on YouTube. Type in Party Switch and see how many videos you can find that are pro-Party Switch.
Don't worry, I'll wait.
You'll see. Nobody's buying it. There's nothing worse than being exposed, but you still think you're fooling somebody. Well, we'll never get it all, but we sure unpacked a lot in this episode. In this episode, we uncovered why 2016 changed everything, how Bernie Sanders exposed the fact that the Democrat Party are socialists today, and they always were socialists. We talked about one of my favorite TV shows, Columbo, and how we were going to use that investigation approach to get to the bottom of what's really going on with this party switch theory. We talked about the crime, we talked about the suspects, we talked about the description, we talked about the lie and the motive of why they would come up with a lie like this in the first place. We also talked about the clues the Democrat Party left behind and whether or not they're guilty. And finally, we summarized everything, hoping you'll understand by now why no thinking individual actually believes in the party switch anymore. Make sure you stick around for our next podcast, What the Left Never Tells You About Jim Jones, because some of you think that story was about a crazy preacher. It was about a lot more than that. I'll conclude with the words of Buddha. 3 things cannot long stay hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. I'm Rob Lett, and I approve this message. But wait, there's more. I know no matter what I said, there's still somebody out there who believes there was a party switch and that I oversimplified this somehow. I still stand by the fact that there's a difference between members of a party and the actual party itself, but for those who can't seem to digest that, here's a list of all of the Dixiecrats or Democrats who voted against the 1964 Civil Rights Bill. Of all of these Democrats, do you know how many switched to become Republican? 2. Just 2. Albert Watson in the House and Strom Thurmond in the Senate. I don't care how you slice it, whether you slice it in the way of the fundamentals of the party that never changed, or you slice it in the way of the number of people who left the Democrat Party to become Republican. With just 2 members switching, there was no party switch. I said a lot in this episode, but honestly, I could have crushed the left's entire argument with just 1 sentence. I could have simply just asked the leftists, if you're socialists today and you were socialists yesterday, explain to me how this represents a switch in your principles. And stay quiet. But anyway, to your left is the true story of Jim Jones. To your right is our latest show. Click either one of them to go there right now. I'm Rob Lett, and I approve this message again.